2020, and I'm not even sure about 21 and 22, but 2020 was a record-setting year for hurricanes. There were 30 named hurricanes in 2020. There were wildfires in Australia. They killed, they're said to have killed 3 billion animals. Hundreds of people were killed in the wildfires. Thousands were hospitalized, and it affected millions and cost Australia about $1 billion. And I know you guys get wildfires here as well, so that kind of hits a little close to home. And of course, there's a conflict going on in Ukraine right now. The numbers I saw are 3,000 plus civilian deaths, 7 million people displaced. And I know we've all been thinking, I'm so glad this isn't happening here, because we might not even be able to be having this talk right now. So these last few years have been pretty rough. And I think a lot of people are probably thinking, where is God in all this? Why is this happening? If God is supposed to be, and this is the problem of evil, right? If God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, then why is it that we live in a world filled with so much evil? So what I was wanting to do is talk to you guys today about what I think is a biblical answer to this. And what this came out of was from my training in philosophy. I specialize in the philosophical debate over this from all the, in all the professional journal articles and all that. And there are these great traditional answers to the problem of evil. There's what they call the free will theodicy. We say that God allows people to mistreat each other because he wants free-willed beings, and because they have free will, he's not going to force them to do what he wants them to do, because that wouldn't be free will. Another answer is what they call soul-making. Some people argue that, God wants us to be spiritually mature, so he puts us in an environment that allows for that spiritual maturity. It kind of goes along with concepts like you can't have courage without danger and other things. So maybe God allows these evil things to happen to help us become spiritually mature. Another type of answer is called, I've always loved this term, it sounds funny, skeptical theism. It's always sounded like a contradiction, like turkey bacon or something like that. But skeptical theism, it's not like a theist who doesn't believe in God. It's a theist who is skeptical of our ability to know why God allows certain things to happen, like evil. So because we don't have access to all of God's thoughts, and we don't know what it takes to run a universe, we can't know whether some evils, maybe God does have a good reason for them. So these are some of the classical answers. Now, there have been some objections recently, and this is what I was kind of working on in that book I've been working on, is answering more contemporary objections to these classical answers. Some current contemporary atheists have been arguing, okay, well, if God really values free will, then why doesn't he maximize free will? He lets, let's say he lets a mugger take someone's money and kill a person. They say, well, if God really did value free will, then he would, because what's happening when a mugger kills someone is that he's allowing that free will choice to take a lifetime of free will choices away. So God, if he really did value free will, he should act like a divine superhero and limit the choices of evildoers to maximize free will across the board. Other atheists have, and this isn't all that too new, but some atheists argue, well, if he wants us to be spiritually mature, this doesn't look like this is an environment that's conducive to that. I mean, of course, now all the things that are going on in current events with the abortion debate, some people are killed before they're even allowed to be born. Other children get sick and die or get into accidents and other things like that. So they're not even getting a chance to be spiritually mature. So that's another objection to that one. And then there's just another objection that says, it just sounds like it's a cop-out to give God all the credit when good things happen, but then try to give him excuses when bad things happen. So Now, don't take me to be saying that I think that these traditional answers are bad, or that they're these new objections are making it so that the old answers to the problem of evil don't work. I think they do. I think they're great answers, and they make a good cumulative case. But in my studies, I've just thought these are great answers, but it still kind of leaves you with this feeling of, but why is it all happening the way it is? And that's whenever I thought, studying the Bible and especially biblical theology in my own time, I've found what I think are some great answers directly from the Bible. If we pay attention to the story, the kind of the meta-narrative of Scripture, if you will, the whole the plot of the Bible, it gives us an answer to the problem of evil that I think has great philosophical and pastoral implications. So that's what I was going to talk about today, and I was going to talk about these three main points: God's purpose for creating, God's plan for humanity, and the results of the fall. And I think whenever we look at these things, after we work through all of it, it will help us answer these objections to the problem of evil, but also give us, like I said, some good pastoral things. So I was going to talk about God's purpose for creating, and if you'll excuse my anthropomorphic picture of God here. But before I went to the next slide, I wanted to ask y'all, if I were to ask you, why did God create the universe, what would you say? Oh, that's a great answer. Anybody else? Yes, okay. Yeah, well, I'm not looking for any particular answer. Well, I'll say this. A lot of times, y'all know, like if you, what's the ultimate Sunday school answer? It's Jesus, right? But a lot of times we're kind of trained, because this is in a lot of catechisms. God created for His glory, right? Have y'all heard that? And I think maybe we hear that, but we don't think about the implications for it, or maybe we're not even sure where it comes from. So I just wanted to show you all this. There's a couple of biblical patterns we see that the Bible tells us that God creates things for His glory, but also the things that God creates display His glory. And I think this has, it's one of my major points, so it's going to have a lot of great implications. Now, we see this in both the Old and New Testaments. I wasn't going to go through all of these, but I was going to read at least one from the Old Testament and the New Testament on both of the points. So this one comes from Isaiah 43, and it says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bring your descendants from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not hold them back. Bring my sons from far away and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Everyone who bears my name is created for my glory. I have formed them, indeed I have made them." And you see, all the humans or everyone he's talking about is made for His glory. In Ephesians, the Apostle Paul says, "Blessed is the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us with every spiritual blessing in the heavens in Christ, for He chose us in Him before the foundation of the world to be holy and blameless in love before Him. He predestined us to be adopted as sons through Jesus Christ for Himself, according to the good pleasure of His will, to the praise of His glorious grace that He lavished on us in the Beloved One." And I think maybe even more kind of straightforward is from Romans 11. Paul says, "For from Him and through Him and to Him are all things. To Him be the glory forever. Amen." So and like I said, we could go through even more passages, but the Bible is pretty clear that God creates for His glory. And the second pattern I just wanted to show you a couple examples from the Old and New Testament is the things that God creates display His glory. And I'm sure you guys are going to be familiar with this one. Psalm 19, right? "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the expanse proclaims the work of His hands. Day after day they pour out speech, night after night they communicate knowledge." The entire universe declares the glory of God. And this one's a little long, but it's Paul in Romans. This is also pretty famous. Paul says, "From God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all godlessness and unrighteousness of people who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. This is what can be known about God is evident among them because God has showed it to them. For his invisible attributes, that is, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen since the creation of the world, being understood through what he has made. As a result, people are without excuse, for though they knew God, they did not glorify him as God or show gratitude. I've always thought that one was so interesting because not only when you look out in the world are you supposed to know that God is there and what he is like, but also the message is so clear that you're held morally responsible for not giving God glory for that. But those are great examples. Now, I just want to be honest with you guys. When I've heard people say God created for his glory, especially earlier on, I thought, well, that kind of sounds a little egoistic, doesn't it? Like he wanted to create a universe to kind of, stroke his ego or something like that. But and I'm not saying you guys are thinking that, but that's one thing. I just wasn't sure what was meant by that. And something I learned while studying philosophy has really helped me with this, I think, and it actually goes along with some of the reasons why y'all said God creates already. So in medieval philosophy, philosophers and theologians they worked through a lot of really fine distinctions back then. But one problem they were trying to work out was, why did God create anything? And this might not seem like that big of a problem, but the issue for them was that God is infinitely perfect. And when you think about that, like as human beings, as finite creatures, anything that we do, right, is to obtain some good thing that we need. When you say any rational choice you make is to obtain some good. So like whether you're going to go to a movie to get a new experience, whether you're going to school to obtain knowledge, or just working at a job so you can get money to get food on the table and support a family. Everything we do is to obtain some good thing. Well, the issue is that since God is infinitely perfect, he shouldn't really need to do anything. Or, do you know what I'm saying? He doesn't want for anything. So why would he even create? And they thought that, well, this is kind of an issue we need to work through. They didn't have Facebook and Xbox back then, so they didn't have anything else better to do. But yeah, the solution they came up with was God's love, actually. They said, well, you know what? God is infinitely loving. And when they look out in the world, they see that love isn't something that you want to keep to yourself, is it? Love is not like some fancy big diamond that you want to lock away in a safe and only let maybe a couple people see because you're worried that someone's going to steal it. When you have love, you want to share it with everyone. I know since I've had my kids, I've learned a lot about love, and it just amazed me. As much as I love my wife, we had our kids or our first son, and that was a miracle. If you've ever witnessed your kids get born, if you're a parent. But when we had our second son, I was just like, I just can't believe. I'm a finite person, but it just feels like I just have all the love in the world. I could have more kids and have just as much love for them. So it's something that spreads itself. It's something that you want to share. So what they concluded was that since God is infinitely loving, he would be inclined to share this love. And one thing that I think is so neat, especially talking to you guys at RTB, is that actually kind of creates almost like some predictive power here. The idea is that any universe that God would create would have rational beings in it. Because if he wants to create to share his love, if you're going to create something that you want to share love with, it can't be just some inanimate object or an animal. We don't need to get into that debate, but I love animals, by the way. But he needs to create a world with rational beings who can know and can love him back with free will to choose to know him and to love him. But that's what they thought the purpose is. And I think that kind of help us make sense out of this idea that God creates to glorify himself. That's the knowing him part and the loving him back. So we think that God created the universe to communicate his goodness, to share his love. So really the Bible and philosophy are coming together on this. And there's just our summary there. God created for his glory. God created to share his love. And to do this, he needs to make rational beings. Now, but like I said, kind of getting to the meta-narrative of Scripture, we ask, okay, so human beings are a part of this creation that God makes to glorify himself, but what specifically are they supposed to be doing? And I think when we pay attention to the covenants in the Bible, this will give us a really good picture of this. If you're interested in this part of the presentation, and you want to dive into it further, I recommend this book, God's Glory and Salvation Through Judgment, a Biblical Theology. James Hamilton is a professor at Southern Seminary. But his thesis is that this is like the plot of the Bible. This is the main theme that you can take from all the books in the Bible. God's glory and salvation through judgment. And a lot of this helped me with some of this material. But getting to the covenants, we basically, God tells humanity what they need to be doing throughout the whole Bible. It starts in Genesis, and y'all know about Genesis 1:28. He makes human beings and commands them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every creature that crawls on the earth. And this really is a pattern. And I'm going to talk about what I think is going on here, and it's going to help make sense out of everything. But this is a pattern that you see throughout the entire Bible. You get to when he starts over with Noah and his family. Right after they get out of the ark, he tells them, come out of the ark, you, your wife, your sons, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out all the living creatures that are with you, birds, livestock, those that crawl on the earth. And they will spread over the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. In the Abrahamic covenant, which is more than just Genesis 17, it's in Genesis 15 and the chapters around there. But he tells Abraham that he's going to bless him, and his seed, the nation that rises from his seed, is going to bless all nations. In Genesis 17, it says, when Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him saying, I am God Almighty. Live in my presence and be blameless. I will set up my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you greatly. I mean, you guys kind of see the pattern here. A really interesting thing about this is that the Great Commission seems to be yet another command telling us to be fruitful and multiply. In Genesis 1, it says God created them in his image, and then he commanded them to multiply. Well, that's what's happening in the church today. The Holy Spirit indwells believers and then slowly matures us, making us more and more in the image of Jesus every day. And when he commands us to make disciples of all nations, it's more of a spiritual thing, but we're basically supposed to be spreading out in God's image. Now, but that kind of gives us insight into what Jesus was commanding them in Eden. What God was commanding them in Eden. He made them in his image, and he was telling them to spread across the earth. Okay? So that's just to give you an idea of what he's wanting us to do. Now, some insight into similarities between the Garden of Eden and the later tabernacle and temples is going to help us get even more of an idea of what he wanted us to do and what all this means, okay? And this is actually a very technical book written by G.K. Bill, but if you're interested in this, there's a book called The Temple and the Church's Mission, a Biblical Theology of the Dwelling Place of God. Okay, so I just wanted to show you guys that resource. And this is where I actually got this table from. But there's corresponding elements between the Garden of Eden and the later tabernacle and temples of the Jewish people, okay? And I wasn't going to read all these Bible passages. I was just going to mention these similarities. The Garden of Eden was a unique dwelling. I mean, what we're saying is both the Eden and the tabernacles are like these things. They're the unique dwelling places of God. There's a holy tree and a blooming tree. There's gold and precious stones. They were entered from the east. They were guarded by cherubim. And you see the rest of these. There's food and bread. There's a priest who works and keeps it. There's rivers flowing out of it, and it's on a mountain. Okay, when you kind of go back to this command to humans in Genesis, you see that he tells them to multiply on the earth and to subdue it and to rule the fish of the sea, birds of the sky. And then I just want to point this out to you, the priest who works and keep it. So some of the conclusions they've reached from these similarities is that we think that Adam had this kind of priest-king role to fulfill. God was wanting them to basically spread out in his image, and Adam was going to be like the king, was going to play the role of king and priest to help them do that while they all walked alongside God in his presence and enjoyed all the benefits of that as they spread across the earth. Okay? And I just wanted to show you a quote from G.K. Bill from this book. Here's kind of what the conclusion he reaches from all this. He says, because Adam and Eve were to subdue and rule over the earth, it is plausible that they would extend the geographical boundaries of the garden until Eden covered the whole earth. They were on the primeval hillock of the hospitable Eden, outside of which lay the inhospitable land. They were to extend the smaller livable area of the garden by transforming the outer chaotic region into a hospitable territory. God's ultimate goal in creation was to magnify his glory throughout the earth by means of his faithful image bearers inhabiting the world in obedience to the divine mandate. So, and it's so interesting because what this entails is that Eden, when God created the world, we don't think it was a worldwide paradise. You know, and that really, it would almost not even make sense for him to tell Adam to subdue a world that's a worldwide paradise, right? One thing that I've seen recently, I kind of just added to my slides. I was really amazed to find this. In the 2nd century church father, Irenaeus, he mentions something really close to this. That the Garden of Eden was this local paradise that God put them there so that they could live in his presence and learn justice from him. This is a really long quote, but I think you guys might enjoy this. It's from his work, Proof of Apostolic Preaching. He also talks about the Garden of Eden in against heresies every once in a while. But he says, this is Irenaeus, so having made the man Lord of the earth and everything in it, he made him in secret Lord of the servants in it, they, however, were in their full development, while the Lord, that is, the man, was a little one, for he was a child and had need to grow up as to come to his full perfection. And so that he might have nourishment and grow up in luxury, place was prepared for him better than this world, well favored in climate, beauty, light, things good to eat, plants, fruit, water, and all other things needful to life, and its name is the garden. And you see, he says there, prepared for him a place better than this world. I always thought that was so interesting because he's writing in the 2nd century. And so fair and goodly was the garden. The word of God was constantly walking in it. He would walk around and talk with the man, prefiguring what was to come to pass in the future, how he would become a man's fellow and talk with him and come among mankind, teaching them justice. An interesting thing that I don't have time to talk about is how he says the word of God. I think Irenaeus was interpreting it to be kind of like a Christophany. When it mentions God walking with them. But the interesting things out of this to me is that he is saying that the Garden of Eden is this local paradise where man was supposed to walk alongside God as he taught them justice. And I think this really makes sense too, because as God's image bearers, one of the things about being an image bearer of God is that you represent God, right? And that's why sin is so terrible. That's why Jesus tells us to be perfect like our Heavenly Father is perfect, because we represent God. Because like we said, everything God creates is supposed to reflect his glory. And when human beings mess up, we're not doing that. So that's why it's so important. But the thing is, another thing, since we're supposed to represent God, is that one of God's attributes is wisdom. And I think this makes sense because if he's going to create his image bearers, they need to be wise, but you can't infuse wisdom into someone. I wish you could. I would, and having kids has made so much sense out of the world to me, But wisdom is something that's earned. It's like inherently experiential. It's not something you could just infuse into somebody. Maybe he could because he's all powerful, but it seems like what Genesis and what Irenaeus and biblical theology are teaching us is that God made this local paradise and he put human beings in it so that they could spread the Garden of Eden to encompass the entire world, so his presence would be everywhere, and so would his image bearers be everywhere. So that's what we think the purpose of humanity is. Now, one last thing is to just talk about the results of the fall so we can see the implications of this and then go back to the problem of evil. I just wanted to skip ahead to the end of the story. Revelation 21, we see what is the end goal of all this, right? Then I heard a loud voice from the throne, "Look, God's dwelling is with humanity, and he will live with them. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them and will be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Grief, crying, and pain will be no more because the previous things have passed away." Another interesting thing that you'll read in the G.K. Beale book is that there's the corresponding elements between Eden and the new heavens and the new earth. So it looks like it all connects. The Eden, the tabernacles, and the temples. Anytime you have God's presence, the new heavens and the new earth. It's the dwelling place of God. There's a tree of life, golden precious stones, a river flowing out of it, and it's on a mountain. Okay. What we take from all this is that it seems like, and it's hard for me. I've struggled with the kind of the order of my slides here, but what it seems like is because God was commanding them to spread across the earth in his image, in his presence, if Adam and Eve and all their descendants would have never sinned, possibly the world would look like Revelation 21 right now. And they would have done this with God's help. No one would have ever died. No one would have ever suffered. But it's when Adam and Eve sin that they get they get ejected out of the garden, out of God's presence. And that's something you learn, biblical theologians talk about. You know, when you read the book of Leviticus, it seems to teach us that the closer you get to God, the closer you get to order, holiness, and the source of life, the farther away you get from God, the closer you get to chaos and death. You know, whenever he curses them, if you just think about the curses in the Mosaic law, he said that if they do what he says, they'll enjoy this great land with his help. And it didn't always have to be supernatural. I mean, just the land would produce all these great things. But if they disobeyed him, they would be exiled, and they would not. The land would not produce what it does for them. But we saw, even after they sinned, Noahic covenant, Abrahamic covenant, and all that, God is still wanting them to spread out in his image, but now they just can't do it with God's help. And now they're cast out of the garden, out of God's presence. So now they're subject to death. So really, this is what I think is kind of the biblical answer, the biblical solution to why the world is the way it is, right? Philosophers talk about moral evil and natural evil, right? Moral evil is why do people mistreat each other? Natural evil is why do hurricanes kill us? Why do we get disease and all that? Well, it seems like God created this world that does declare his glory. It's not a terrible place in and of itself, and it's all put together in an amazing way that works together in an orderly way, and everything works together for the good of humanity. But this was just a world he created that he was going to put us in to teach us wisdom as we basically walked alongside of him to consummate the earth, right? And spread his image. So he's always wanted to be in our presence. He's always wanted to have relationship with us. But there was just some separation that occurred after the fall, and we were just subject to the world as he made it, is what it seems like the Bible is saying. So really quickly, I wanted to get back to talking about the implications of the problem of evil, and then I was going to kind of touch on some pastoral implications from this. So getting back to the problem of evil. Now, before I talk about all this, I do like to stop and and say a couple words. One thing I like to emphasize that, if you've ever, like in these last few years or whenever, if you ever looked out in the world and thought, this just doesn't seem to be the way the world ought to be. And I know a lot of non-believers struggle with that, but probably also Christians might feel guilty for even thinking it. But the thing is, you're actually right? I mean, we talk about nature red in tooth and claw, and there's some great things about, like ecological things that what looks evil actually is for our good. But as far as the way the human world is, with us, having wars, getting sick and dying, that's actually not the way God designed it to be, right? Because we saw what his plan was for us. So it's okay to think, this isn't the way the world should be. You're right. If you're a believer or a non-believer, you're right. It's not the way the world should be. And also, if we lose loved ones too, you can think about that. God desires to be in union with us, in our presence. When we lose a loved one, we're actually, our will is matching God's will, but I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. But yeah, just as a quick summary before I talk about some of these objections to the classical answers to the problem of evil that I mentioned earlier. So here's kind of our summary. God created for his glory, right? He created so other beings could know and freely love him. He wanted humanity to join him in consummating the earth with his glory, and Adam and Eve sinned, exiling humanity from God's presence, but still retained the mission to spread God's glory. Now, what I've found so interesting is that all these solutions to the problem of evil actually are all built into this, aren't they? You can kind of see them in a little, they're in there a little bit. I mean, we saw that when he creates to communicate his goodness, to create rational beings to know and love him, that necessarily entails free will, right? He wants to create good image bearers who are wise and are spiritually mature. And he does have good reasons for allowing evil. Now, but when you think about it, though, because one of the main takeaways is that the main purpose that God created for is to glorify himself. Okay. When someone comes back and objects and says, well, why doesn't God maximize free will? The thing is, free will is not the main point why he created. It plays a crucial role, but if he doesn't maximize free will, it's not contradicting his purpose, right? Because his purpose was not to create a paradise for free creatures. It was to glorify himself. And I'm about to make a point here in a second. You might be asking a question that I'll answer here in a second. But free will is only necessary to the point where everybody has the chance to choose him, I would say. So if he doesn't maximize free will and he allows us, he allows people to kill each other, I don't think that actually creates a logical problem with monotheism and evil. The other objection we talked about was that people say, well, what about people who die early? What about people who are aborted or whatever? The thing is, again, his main purpose is to glorify himself. So the main purpose is not to make a spiritual boot camp for us and everybody gets a chance to graduate. So just like free will, that's not his main purpose, so it doesn't contradict his purposes if people die early. Okay? And then, but having said that, I think that in the new heavens and the earth, all of history will show that humanity's dependence on God. So even when people die early, that's just kind of reminding us that, if we would have just done what God said, the world wouldn't be like this. But kind of the point I wanted to make, they talk about, well, it seems like a cop-out. You give thanks to God when good things happen, but you make excuses when bad things happen. But ultimately, they're really, when we talk about that skeptical theism, everyone says, well, I think God does have a reason, even though we might not know what it is. I would submit to you that ultimately all evil does have a purpose in the sense that all evil glorifies God. Now, I'm not saying that evil is necessary. I don't think he had to include it. But what I'm saying is that evil does have this purpose of, and I know that sounds crazy when I say it glorifies God, but it emphasizes his goodness and our dependence on him. Does that make sense? And if that sounds crazy, I'd just like to show people what Paul says. In Romans 3, he says, but if our unrighteousness highlights God's righteousness, what are we to say? I'm using a human argument. Is God unrighteous to inflict wrath? Absolutely not. Otherwise, how will God judge the world? But if by my lie God's truth abounds to his glory, why am I also still being judged as a sinner? And why not say, just as some people slanderously claim, we say, let us do what is evil so that good may come. Their condemnation is deserved. Kind of a long passage, but Paul is saying that when people do bad things, it glorifies God. And as weird as that sounds, what he's saying is that, when we see evil in the world, we think that's not the way it should be. And how could we say that unless there was some absolute standard of goodness, right? When someone mistreats someone, you say, that's not the way it should be because God has told us better and we know better. So in a way, evil emphasizes God's goodness and it glorifies him. But someone might come back and say, well, Paul, why don't we just do bad things all the time? We'll glorify God all day. And he's saying, no, don't. That's wrong because we're God's image bearers. We should not be doing bad things. So, but that's the point he's making, is that evil highlights God's goodness. So I would just say that ultimately it all does highlight God's goodness. So there is somewhat of a purpose to it, even if we can't tell how it's being played out in history. That makes sense. So just the conclusion, I just wanted to read these points. God created for his glory and commanded humanity to help him consummate his creation. All evil, moral and natural, is the result of human choices, but it all shows God's goodness. God is allowing humanity to learn its lesson the hard way. That's kind of what I learned from having kids was, he gives humanity free will and says, look, I've given you everything, just do what I say. And it's that infused. You can't infuse wisdom, and that's what I've learned. Is like, having these two free will beings in my house. I tell them, I say, look, I love you, and I'm telling you this because I know it's best for you. Do it this way, and guess what? Most of the time, they don't do it that way, and they've got to learn the lesson the hard way. And I just think that's what the Bible is showing us. If we would have done what God said to do from the beginning, we would still be in his presence. Possibly the world would look like Revelation 21, but instead we got cast out into the world that he prepared for us, but he was going to help us consummate. So before we get to the Q&A, I do like, because dealing with the philosophical problem of evil and animal suffering, I hear people make this distinction. Well, this is like the philosophical answer to the problem of evil, but it's not really going to help anybody who's going through suffering. So I just like to kind of talk about some of these things to give you maybe some pastoral application to it, because I think that the biblical story really does have great applications. So, and of course I'm going to go to the book of Job to talk about this. It's just always amazed me, if you're familiar with this story in Job, he loses all of his stuff, he loses all of his kids in one day. And he had a lot more kids than me, but I can't even imagine losing both of my kids and all my stuff in one day, then getting sick, and then my wife nagging on me about the whole situation. But what is Job's response? In Job 1 it says, then Job stood up, tore his robe and shaved his head. He fell to the ground and worshiped, saying, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will leave this life. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He worships God. And I always thought, it just amazes me that he did that. And I thought, how could you possibly do that? As someone who thinks about the problem of evil all the time, I've thought about some of the answers that I've come up with and read about. Like, I'd be really sick and feeling terrible, and I'd think about some of these solutions. I'm like, this doesn't help. But what I think that we can take away from the biblical story is an emphasis on God's grace. Imagine, because the atheists a lot of times are saying, if God was all-knowing and all-powerful and all good, then he wouldn't allow evil to occur. But can y'all imagine if we all ask God right now, eliminate all evil, please? What do you think would happen? Right? It would look like Endgame with Thanos, right? But it wouldn't be half of us; it'd be everybody. Everybody just go to dust, right? To dust we return. But the thing is, so the very fact that we're here right now is because of grace, isn't it? If He would have eliminated Adam and Eve right when they sinned, we wouldn't be here, would we? Just the fact that we're here and enjoying this good creation emphasizes His grace. Also, I think Job also had heard about the promise God made to Adam and Eve that a seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent, because he says in 19, "But I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the end He will stand on the dust. Even after my skin has been destroyed, yet I will see God in my flesh." Basically, I think what the biblical story, what we can take away from it, is that it highlights God's goodness, it highlights God's grace, right? In His grace, He allowed humanity to continue even after, like my cell phone upsets me sometimes. Printers and my computer, they've got one job to do and they don't do it. He made humanity to represent Him, and guess what? They didn't do the job. But in His grace, He let us live through it and still held our hand as we were supposed to spread across the world in His image. But when we lose people, we can still say, we can join with Job and say, well, God gives and God takes away. Every moment we have with our stuff, every moment we have with our loved ones is because of God's grace. And like I said earlier, I was kind of getting ahead of myself, but when you lose a loved one, God wills to be in our presence for all eternity. So the reason why we get so sad when we lose people is because our will matches God's will. It's just His turn with them, Another thing about having kids, you have to learn how to share, right? But I just think that's one of the main takeaways. Everything we have is because of God's grace. We haven't been good image bearers, so in His grace He lets us live through all this, but it explains why the world is the way it is, And I know through RTB resources, y'all talk about this all the time. Really, a lot of what's wrong with the world is mainly human beings. We even make natural disasters worse, whether it's because of the way we respond to it or the way we don't plan for it. So I hope that bit of pastoral application helps. But that's what I had for you guys. So if the rest of these slides are just shameless self-promotion. So. So if y'all have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.